is the NDP leader, the Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley. Premier Notley, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's good to be here.
So, can you give us your quick take on equalization? Because I think it's going to be a turning point in the election, is where a party positions themselves on that issue. Because Albertans are so angry at it. Where do you stand on it? What needs to be done?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we need to first give credit where it's due, which is that the current equalization formula is one that was put in place by Stephen Harper and my opposition, Jason Kenney. But certainly our Minister of Finance has been very clear that in particular, the fiscal stabilization formula is a mess. It doesn't account for volatility, which of course defines Alberta's revenue streams, and it also doesn't do enough. So we got 2 checks for $250 million. Big deal. And at the end of the day, when you look at the significance of what our economy faced and what our Treasury faced, that's nowhere near close. And so we do need to find a way. I mean, all of Canada benefits from the volatility of our finances here in Alberta on the upside, and we need folks to be more with us and having our backs when it goes into the downside. And so we need to talk about how we can do better.
One criticism that our last guest gave was that you're not much different than the progressive Conservatives. There hasn't been a lot of change. You haven't fixed education. Well, I said education sounds bad. Haven't fixed health care. Haven't fixed children's services. Haven't fixed the roller coaster ride and the reliance on resource revenues. Did you want to tell us how, if you might see it a little bit differently?
I absolutely would see it differently. We have stabilized our spending patterns. If you were to look at a graph, you'd see that under the Conservatives it looked like a picture of the Rocky Mountains, and now we've got this very sort of very careful and controlled process on spending, and it's provided a tremendous amount of stability and predictability. What we have done with education and healthcare, I'm very proud of. I mean, obviously we took over the government at a time when we were in fiscal crisis because of the drop in oil prices and what that did to our revenue streams. But we've actually managed to invest significantly in improving, slowly, carefully, both the healthcare and the education experience that our kids have. We built, when we took over, you'll remember this, Danielle, the other guys were really good at promising schools, and then we'd have all these great big empty fields with signs and no schools. And in fact, we got in and we realized that the vast majority of the schools that the Conservatives had promised, they'd never put a single cent aside for. So in the midst of the economic crisis that we were dealing with, we had to find the money to build and modernize 240 schools across this province, and that's what we have done. And we're going to carry on with that. And we can. The Cancer Centre in Calgary is another example. For over a decade, the people of Calgary had to listen to the previous government promise and then dither and go back and forth and never come clean or move forward on that. We came in, we looked at the options, we made a decision within months, and now we are well underway to having a world-class cancer centre in Southern Alberta, long overdue, probably the best of its kind in Canada. That's what happens when you come in committed to improving healthcare and education.
Danielle and I are down here today in the context of the throne speech, but of course everybody is waiting with bated breath to see when you decide to drop the writ, to know when that 28-day period begins. Everybody in campaign mode already, and we know one of the two big sort of vulnerabilities, I suppose, from a United Conservative standpoint, as they hone in on you, their messaging will be number one, there's big deficit and debt and no apparent plan to pay it back, and number two, Rachel Notley never campaigned on the carbon tax, and they're framing this upcoming spring election as a referendum on the carbon tax. I suspect that some of your government's messaging, maybe on return on investment or proof of performance in the context of that carbon tax, we'll hear today as part of the throne speech. What's your answer to Albertans that are saying, hey, listen, she never told us to expect that. She didn't campaign on that.
Well, first of all, on the matter of the deficit, what we did 2 years ago was we laid out a path to balance. And when we did that, we actually attracted from the C.D. Howe Institute, that radical left-wing organization, top marks in the country for the fact that we have laid out the most transparent, forward-looking fiscal plan in the country. And we are meeting or beating those targets. So we will get to balance in 2023. And so far, we've met or beaten our targets. Minister Cecil announced just a few weeks ago that we're just about $2 billion ahead of paying down the deficit than what we had originally projected. So we're on solid ground there, and we have the best balance sheet in the country now, and we will have the best balance sheet in the country when we balance. As far as our climate leadership plan, we ran on our climate leadership plan. We were very clear that we needed to look forward, that we could not be a government that pretended climate change wasn't real. We couldn't continue to stick our head in the sand, and we had to look at a meaningful approach to taking on what is a generational crisis, not just in Alberta, but in Canada and in the world. And so we are doing our part. Interestingly, it is also, of course, something that's fundamentally important to our economic health going forward, because if we don't support industry as we reposition to being a more sustainable, non-renewable energy producer, then we are going to find ourselves having a tougher and tougher time finding markets. So we were very clear about that in the election, and I know leadership is tough, and sometimes what happens when you're in leadership, you asked me earlier what do I find interesting about being premier. Well, you don't always get to choose between a good decision and a bad decision. Sometimes you're offered up two hard decisions, and leadership is doing the research, doing the work, and picking the worst of the two hard decisions and then moving forward with it, because in the long term, that's what people need you to do, not play politics.
Can I ask you about your long-term plan? Because economists have pointed out that the reason your plan might work is that you're planning for freezing spending when you get out into the later years. So if you're going to freeze spending anyway, why not do it now rather than continue to see the debt rise?
Well, we're not actually planning on freezing spending. What we're planning on doing is keeping it in line or a little bit below population and inflation, and then being very strategic within that. So we're absolutely, that's not exactly what we were doing. We couldn't do it. I mean, Jason Kenney's plan to freeze education spending would mean that 15,000 kids, new kids, would walk into our schools in September, and there wouldn't be a new teacher there to greet them at the door. So freezing spending in a province that is young and growing and dynamic like ours will actually mean cuts. And so we're not doing that. So what we're doing is we're doing it carefully. Under the previous government, we literally lurched from overspending to slashing spending, 6 months here, 6 months there, and we created huge instability. I mean, the actual chaos was itself a cost, above and beyond the fact that we actually had a different kind of debt. Instead of a debt that showed up in black and white and ink on paper, we had a debt that showed up in the form of moldy ceiling tiles falling on the kids' heads in overcrowded classrooms. And so what we're doing is we're taking a calm, considered, thoughtful path. We're planning much farther out into the distance, and we're hitting our targets. And that's what good management looks like.
How difficult is it to steer clear of flirting with the idea of a provincial sales tax?
You know what? We've been very clear. And I think one thing I hope that Albertans know about me is that when I say something, I mean it. And when I make a commitment, I keep it. And I made a very clear commitment going into the last election that we would not move on a sales tax, and I kept it. And I have already, for this election, said I will not go forward with a sales tax.
It's a non-starter.
It's a non-starter. It's just not a thing. We have laid out a path to balance with revenue streams that are conservatively assessed on the basis of essentially our current revenue formula. We're not going to blow a $4 billion hole in the budget by giving a great big experimental corporate tax rate that is unnecessary, because we already have an $11 billion tax advantage with the next lowest tax province in the country. We're going to stay the course with our current revenue generating regime.
Some might argue that the carbon tax really is a sales tax, because you've said that you're rebating only up to the first $30 per ton, and then as the federal floor ends up going higher and higher, you're just going to pocket that general revenues.
Actually, we haven't said that. I know Mr. Kenney has tried to suggest that we've said that, but that's not
So you're
true.
Committing to rebating all of it, like the federal plan would do?
We are
in other
still
provinces?
looking at it. We're still looking at it, but we absolutely are, and we're certainly not talking about rebating the whole thing, but in terms of the formula for the rebate that we have for the first 30, we're absolutely looking at how we can, if we get to the point of moving forward, how we would rebate in the city.
And final question, we have 30 seconds left with you, Premier. Appreciate your time. What would you perceive to be, or what's your personal sense of your and your party's greatest accomplishment in your first term?
I think what we have done is we have had Albertans' backs. you know, we got elected in the midst of incredible turmoil. People had lost trust in government through scandal and corruption and sky palaces and things like that. And then we inherited an economy in free fall. And we could have made things worse. We didn't. We invested in jobs. We stood up for the pipeline. We've invested in diversification. We have made the single biggest play into diversifying our energy sector and getting more value for the resources that we all own than anybody has since Premier Peter Locke, and I'm very grateful.
Thanks for joining us. We know it's a busy day for you this morning and appreciate your time.
Always
Thanks.
a pleasure, Premier.
Take care.
We'll be back with more from the Alberta Legislature. Danielle Smith, Ryan Jespersen live on Chorus Radio.